paid my dues time after time. I've done my sentence, but committed no crime.
But I'm sorry, if you're pictured with Ghislaine Maxwell, J.E., and your supposed husband at a party, you're part of the problem.
And I can come up for a second. So basically, what's happening? I said this in Kelly, but you weren't in there yet. It used to be Trump's best friend married Melania's best friend from Romania,
Mm-hmm.
and they were girls of Epstein at the time when they met. Well, they got divorced, Melania's best friend and that guy. And Trump did his best friend a favor and deported her after their divorce. And now that she's back in Romania, she is talking. And she's telling the 100% truth of what actually happened in Epstein's island when it comes to Melania and Trump and her ex-husband.
Okay.
So because of that starting to come out as of like last week, Melania started had that press conference last night. Coincidental? No.
No.
She's afraid.
Oh, yeah.
Because that woman still has all the evidence against her.
Oh, yeah. That's the thing. That's the problem that they don't realize. Their house of cards is falling.
Yes.
And it's time that they need to let the cards fall and say, hey, yes, we were part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Step away from it.
And that woman basically is a victim that married her assailants, basically.
Yeah. Just like Melania. Just like Ivanka.
Mm-hmm.
Not Ivanka.
Even
Ivanka.
at a certain point, Maxwell was probably a victim.
Oh, she
turned
was.
into the salient. Yeah.
Yeah, she admitted, they even said it. She started out as a person, of a victim, as a survivor, and then Epstein turned her into the gatherer.
Yeah. And a lot of women who have been, and men, who have been victims turn into the the pedos.
Right.
They do because it's a survival technique.
Right.
And it's also a learned behavior too.
And I think some of it has to do with it happened to me, so I want other people to suffer like me.
Well, that's the learned behavior. Something gets switched in their mindset, like me. I don't want anything like that to ever happen to what actually happened to me. I wouldn't want that.
Right.
But in some people's mind, it actually switches. So I'll drop back down because you're going to start soon. But I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I understand.
In case you didn't hear it.
I hadn't heard the full story. I just heard, as a matter of fact, right before I went into Kelly's live was when I heard Don Lemon talking about she came out and surprised everybody with that statement. Let's have public hearings.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. I heard some of it, but yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of that going on. It's time everybody just needs to realize that it's falling apart, and then whoever's involved needs to stop and just let the cards fall.
Yep. We just have to let it listen. It's crazy.
All right. Yeah, well, I guess
Down.
start. You didn't have to, but okay. This is going to be a two-parter because if I don't, it's 4 hours long. It's 8 segments. So we'll do the first. We'll do the first 4 tonight or today, and then we'll do second floor, maybe Saturday, maybe tomorrow. We'll see. All right, here we go. Let me know. Okay, there's the first one. Let me know if you can hear it.
Report of the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy. The Warren Commission Report. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Report of the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy. The Warren Commission Report by the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy. Chapter 4, The Assassin, Part 1. The preceding chapter has established that the bullets which killed President Kennedy and wounded Governor Connally were fired from the southeast corner window of the 6th floor of the Texas Schoolbook Depository building, and that the weapon which fired these bullets was a Mannlicher Carcano 6.5mm Italian rifle bearing the serial number C2766. In this chapter, the Commission evaluates the evidence upon which it has based its conclusion concerning the identity of the assassin. This evidence includes 1. The ownership and possession of the weapon used to commit the assassination. 2. The means by which the weapon was brought into the depository building. 3. The identity of the person present at the window from which the shots were fired. 4. The killing of Dallas Patrolman J.D. Tippit within 45 minutes after the assassination. 5. The resistance to arrest and the attempted shooting of another police officer by the man, Lee Harvey Oswald, subsequently accused of assassinating President Kennedy and killing Patrolman Tippit. 6. The lies told to the police by Oswald. 7. The evidence linking Oswald to the attempted killing of Major General Edwin A. Walker, resigned U.S. Army, on April 10, 1963. And 8. Oswald's capability with a rifle. Ownership and possession of assassination weapon. Purchase of rifle by Oswald. Shortly after the Mannlicher Carcano rifle was found on the 6th floor of the Texas Schoolbook Depository building, agents of the FBI learned from retail outlets in Dallas that Crescent Firearms, Inc. of New York City was a distributor of surplus Italian 6.5mm military rifles. During the evening of November 22, 1963, a review of the records of Crescent Firearms revealed that the firm had shipped an Italian carbine, serial number C2766, to Klein's Sporting Goods Company of Chicago, Illinois. After searching their records from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., the officers of Klein's discovered that a rifle bearing serial number C2766 had been shipped to 1A Hidell, Post Office Box 2915, Dallas, Texas, on March 20, 1963. According to its microfilm records, Klein's received an order for a rifle on March 13, 1963, on a coupon clipped from the February 1963 issue of the American Rifleman magazine. The order coupon was signed in hand printing A. Hidell, P.O. Box 2915, Dallas, Texas. It was sent in an envelope bearing the same name and return address in handwriting. Document examiners for the Treasury Department and the FBI testified unequivocally that the bold printing on the face of the mail-order coupon was in the handprinting of Lee Harvey Oswald, and that the writing on the envelope was also his. Oswald's writing on these and other documents was identified by comparing the writing and printing on the documents in question with that appearing on documents known to have been written by Oswald, such as his letters, passport application, and endorsements of checks. In addition to the order coupon, the envelope contained a U.S. postal money order for $21.45, purchased as number 2202130-462 in Dallas, Texas, on March 12, 1963. The canceled money order was obtained from the Post Office Department. Opposite the printed words "Pay to" were written the words "Klein's Sporting Goods." And opposite the printed word "From" were written the words A. Hidell, P.O. Box 2915, Dallas, Texas. These words were also in the handwriting of Lee Harvey Oswald. From Klein's records, it was possible to trace the processing of the order after its receipt. A bank deposit made on March 13, 1963, included an item of $21.45. Klein's shipping order form shows an imprint made by the cash register which recorded the receipt of $21.45 on March 13, 1963. This price included $19.95 for the rifle and the scope, and $1.50 for postage and handling. The rifle without the scope cost only $12.78. According to the vice president of Klein's, William Waldman, the scope was mounted on the rifle by a gunsmith employed by Klein's, and the rifle was shipped fully assembled in accordance with customary company procedures. The specific rifle shipped against the order had been received by Klein's from Crescent on February 21, 1963. It bore the manufacturer's serial number C2766. On that date, Klein's placed an internal control number VC836 on this rifle. According to Klein's shipping order form, one Italian carbine 6.5 x4 X scope, control number VC836, serial number C2766, was shipped parcel post to A. Hidell, P.O. Box 2915, Dallas, Texas, on March 20, 1963. Information received from the Italian Armed Forces Intelligence Service has established that this particular rifle was the only rifle of its type bearing serial number C2766. The post office box to which the rifle was shipped was rented to Lee H. Oswald from October 9, 1962 to May 14, 1963. Experts on handwriting identification from the Treasury Department and the FBI testified that the signature and other writing on the application for that box were in the handwriting of Lee Harvey Oswald, as was a change of address card dated May 12, 1963, by which Oswald requested that mail addressed to that box be forwarded to him in New Orleans, where he had moved on April 24. Since the rifle was shipped from Chicago on March 20, 1963, it was received in Dallas during the period when Oswald rented and used the box. It is not known whether the application for Post Office Box 2915 listed A. Hidell as a person entitled to receive mail at this box. In accordance with postal regulations, the portion of the application which lists names of persons other than the applicant entitled to receive mail was thrown away after the box was closed in May 1963. Postal Inspector Harry D. Holmes of the Dallas Post Office testified, however, that when a package is received for a certain box, a notice is placed in that box regardless of whether the name on the package is listed on the application as a person entitled to receive mail through that box. The person having access to the box then takes the notice to the window and is given the package. Ordinarily, Inspector Holmes testified, identification is not requested because it is assumed that the person with the notice is entitled to the package. Oswald's use of the name Hidell to purchase the assassination weapon was one of several instances in which he used this name as an alias. When arrested on the day of the assassination, he had in his possession a Smith & Wesson .38 caliber revolver purchased by mail-order coupon from Seaport Traders, Inc., a mail-order division of George Rose & Company, Los Angeles. The mail-order coupon listed the purchaser as A.J. Hidell, age 28, with the address of Post Office Box 2915 in Dallas. Handwriting experts from the FBI and the Treasury Department testified that the writing on the mail-order form was that of Lee Harvey Oswald. Among other identification cards in Oswald's wallet at the time of his arrest were a Selective Service Notice of Classification, a Selective Service Registration Certificate, and a Certificate of Service in the U.S. Marine Corps, all three cards being in his own name. Also in his wallet at that time were a Selective Service Notice of Classification and a Marine Certificate of Service in the name of Alec James Hiddell. On the Hiddell Selective Service card, there appeared a signature, Alec J. Hiddell, and the photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald. Experts on questioned documents from the Treasury Department and the FBI testified that the Hiddell cards were counterfeit photographic reproductions made by photographing the Oswald cards, retouching the resulting negatives, and producing prints from the retouched negatives. The Hiddell signature on the Notice of Classification was in the handwriting of Oswald. In Oswald's personal effects found in his room at 1026 North Beckley Avenue in Dallas was a purported international certificate of vaccination signed by Dr. A. J. Hiddell, Post Office Box 30016, New Orleans. It certified that Lee Harvey Oswald had been vaccinated for smallpox on June 8, 1963. This, too, was a forgery. The signature of A. J. Hiddell was in the handwriting of Lee Harvey Oswald. There is no Dr. Hiddell licensed to practice medicine in Louisiana. There is no Post Office Box 30016 in the New Orleans Post Office. But Oswald had rented Post Office Box 30061 in New Orleans on June 3, 1963, listing Marina Oswald and A.J. Hiddell as additional persons entitled to receive mail in the box. The New Orleans postal authorities had not discarded the portion of the application listing the names of those, other than the owner of the box, entitled to receive mail through the box. Expert testimony confirmed that the writing on this application was that of Lee Harvey Oswald. Hiddell's name on the Post Office Box application was part of Oswald's use of a non-existent Hiddell to serve as president of the so-called New Orleans chapter of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Marina Oswald testified that she first learned of Oswald's use of the fictitious name Hiddell in connection with his pro-Castro activities in New Orleans. According to her testimony, he compelled her to write the name Hiddell on membership cards in the space designated for the signature of the chapter president. The name Hiddell was stamped on some of the chapter's printed literature and on the membership application blanks. Marina Oswald testified, quote, "I knew there was no such organization, and I know Hiddell is merely an altered Fidel, and I laughed at such foolishness," end quote. Hiddell was a fictitious president of an organization of which Oswald was the only member. When seeking employment in New Orleans, Oswald listed a Sergeant Robert Hiddell as a reference on one job application, and George Hiddell as a reference on another. Both names were found to be fictitious. Moreover, the use of Alec as a first name for Hiddell is a further link to Oswald, because Alec was Oswald's nickname in Russia. Letters received by Marina Oswald from her husband signed Alec were given to the commission. Oswald's palm print on rifle barrel. Based on the above evidence, the commission concluded that Oswald purchased the rifle found on the 6th floor of the depository building. Additional evidence of ownership was provided in the form of palm print identification, which indicated that Oswald had possession of the rifle he had purchased. A few minutes after the rifle was discovered on the 6th floor of the depository building, it was examined by Lieutenant J.C. Day of the Identification Bureau of the Dallas Police. He lifted the rifle by the wooden stock after his examination convinced him that the wood was too rough to take fingerprints. Captain J.W. Fritz, then ejected a cartridge by operating the bolt, but only after Day viewed the knob on the bolt through a magnifying glass and found no prints. Day continued to examine the rifle with the magnifying glass, looking for possible fingerprints. He applied fingerprint powder to the side of the metal housing near the trigger and noticed traces of 2 prints. At 11:45 p.m. on November 22, the rifle was released to the FBI and forwarded to Washington, where it was examined on the morning of November 23 by Sebastian F. Latona, supervisor of the latent fingerprint section of the FBI's Identification Division. In his testimony before the commission, Latona stated that when he received the rifle, the area where prints were visible was protected by cellophane. He examined these prints, as well as photographs of them which the Dallas police had made, and concluded that, quote, the formations, the ridge formations and characteristics, were insufficient for purposes of either affecting identification or a determination that the print was not identical with the prints of people. Accordingly, my opinion simply was that the latent prints which were there were of no value, end quote. Latona then processed the complete weapon, but developed no identifiable prints. He stated that the poor quality of the wood and the metal would cause the rifle to absorb moisture from the skin, thereby making a clear print unlikely. On November 22, however, before surrendering possession of the rifle to the FBI laboratory, Lieutenant Day of the Dallas Police Department had lifted a palm print from the underside of the gun barrel, quote, near the firing end of the barrel, about 3 inches under the wood stock, when I took the wood stock loose, end quote. Lifting a print involves the use of adhesive material to remove the fingerprint powder which adheres to the original print. In this way, the powdered impression is actually removed from the object. The lifting had been so complete in this case that there was no trace of the print on the rifle itself when it was examined by Latona, nor was there any indication that the lift had been performed. Day, on the other hand, believed that sufficient traces of the print had been left on the rifle barrel because he did not release the lifted print until November 26, when he received instructions to send everything that we had to the FBI. The print arrived in the FBI laboratory in Washington on November 29, mounted on a card on which Lieutenant Day had written the words, quote, off underside gun barrel near end of grip C2766, end quote. The print's positive identity as having been lifted from the rifle was confirmed by FBI laboratory tests which established that the adhesive material bearing the print also bore impressions of the same irregularities that appeared on the barrel of the rifle. Latona testified that this palm print was the right palm print of Lee Harvey Oswald. At the request of the commission, Arthur Mandela, fingerprint expert with the New York City Police Department, conducted an independent examination and also determined that this was the right palm print of Oswald. Latona's findings were also confirmed by Ronald G. Whitmus, another FBI fingerprint expert. In the opinion of these experts, it was not possible to estimate the time which elapsed between the placing of the print on the rifle and the date of the lift. Experts testifying before the commission agreed that palm prints are as unique as fingerprints for purposes of establishing identification. Oswald's palm print on the underside of the barrel demonstrates that he handled the rifle when it was disassembled. A palm print could not be placed on this portion of the rifle when assembled because the wooden foregrip covers the barrel at this point. The print is additional proof that the rifle was in Oswald's possession. Fibers on rifle. In a crevice between the butt plate of the rifle and the wooden stock was a tuft of several cotton fibers of dark blue, gray-black, and orange-yellow shades. On November 23, 1963, these fibers were examined by Paul M. Stombaugh, a special agent assigned to the Hair and Fiber Unit of the FBI laboratory. He compared them with the fibers found in the shirt which Oswald was wearing when arrested in the Texas theater. This shirt was also composed of dark blue, gray-black, and orange-yellow cotton fibers. Stombaugh testified that the colors, shades, and twist of the fibers found in the tuft on the rifle matched those in Oswald's shirt. Stombaugh explained in his testimony that in fiber analysis, as distinct from fingerprint or firearms identification, it is not possible to state with scientific certainty that a particular small group of fibers come from a certain piece of clothing to the exclusion of all others, because there are not enough microscopic characteristics present in fibers. Judgments as to probability will depend on the number and types of matches. He concluded, quote, "There is no doubt in my mind that these fibers could have come from this shirt. There is no way, however, to eliminate the possibility of the fibers having come from another identical shirt." End quote. Having considered the probabilities as explained in Stombaugh's testimony, the Commission has concluded that the fibers in the tuft on the rifle most probably came from the shirt worn by Oswald when he was arrested, and that this was the same shirt which Oswald wore on the morning of the assassination. Marina Oswald testified that she thought her husband wore this shirt to work on that day. The testimony of those who saw him after the assassination was inconclusive about the color of Oswald's shirt, but Mary Bledsoe, a former landlady of Oswald, saw him on a bus approximately 10 minutes after the assassination and identified the shirt as being the one worn by Oswald, primarily because of a distinctive hole in the shirt's right elbow. Moreover, the bus transfer which he obtained as he left the bus was still in the pocket when he was arrested. Although Oswald returned to his rooming house after the assassination, and when questioned by the police, claimed to have changed his shirt, the evidence indicates that he continued wearing the same shirt which he was wearing all morning, and which he was still wearing when arrested. In light of these findings, the Commission evaluated the additional testimony of Stombaugh that the fibers were caught in the crevice of the rifle's butt plate, quote, "in the recent past," end quote. Although Stombaugh was unable to estimate the period of time the fibers were on the rifle, he said that the fibers, quote, "were clean, they had good color to them, there was no grease on them, and they were not fragmented. They looked as if they had just been picked up," end quote. The relative freshness of the fibers is strong evidence that they were caught on the rifle on the morning of the assassination or during the preceding evening. For 10 days prior to the eve of the assassination, Oswald had not been present at Ruth Payne's house in Irving, Texas, where the rifle was kept. Moreover, the Commission found no reliable evidence that Oswald used the rifle at any time between September 23, when it was transported from New Orleans, and November 22, the day of the assassination. The fact that, on the morning of the assassination, Oswald was wearing the shirt from which these relatively fresh fibers most probably originated provides some evidence that they were placed on the rifle that day, since there was limited, if any, opportunity for Oswald to handle the weapon during the 2 months prior to November 22. On the other hand, Stombaugh pointed out that fibers might retain their freshness if the rifle had been, quote, "put aside," end quote, after catching the fibers. The rifle used in the assassination probably had been wrapped in a blanket for about 8 weeks prior to November 22. Because the relative freshness of these fibers might be explained by the continuous storage of the rifle in the blanket, the Commission was unable to reach any firm conclusion as to when the fibers were caught in the rifle. The Commission was able to conclude, however, that the fibers most probably came from Oswald's shirt. This adds to the conviction of the Commission that Oswald owned and handled the weapon used in the assassination. Photograph of Oswald with rifle. During the period from March 2, 1963 to April 24, 1963, the Oswalds lived on Neely Street in Dallas, in a rented house which had a small backyard. One Sunday, while his wife was hanging diapers, Oswald asked her to take a picture of him holding a rifle, a pistol, and issues of 2 newspapers, later identified as The Worker and The Militant. 2 pictures were taken. The Commission has concluded that the rifle shown in these pictures is the same rifle which was found on the 6th floor of the depository building on November 22, 1963. One of these pictures, exhibit number 133A, shows most of the rifle's configuration. Special Agent Lyndall L. Schoenfeld, a photography expert with the FBI, photographed the rifle used in the assassination, attempting to duplicate the position of the rifle and the lighting in exhibit number 133A. After comparing the rifle in the simulated photograph with the rifle in exhibit number 133A, Schoenfeld testified, quote, "I found it to be the same general configuration. All appearances were the same," end quote. He found, quote, "one notch in the stock at this point that appears very faintly in the photograph," end quote. He stated, however, that while he, quote, "found no differences," end quote, between the rifles in the 2 photographs, he could not make a, quote, "positive identification to the exclusion of all other rifles of the same general configuration," end quote. The authenticity of these pictures has been established by expert testimony, which links the second picture, Commission Exhibit number 133B, to Oswald's Imperial Reflex camera, with which Marina Oswald testified she took the pictures. The negative of that picture, Commission Exhibit number 133B, was found among Oswald's possessions. Using a recognized technique of determining whether a picture was taken with a particular camera, Schoenfeld compared this negative with a negative which he made by taking a new picture with Oswald's camera. He concluded that the negative of exhibit number 133B was exposed in Oswald's Imperial Reflex camera to the exclusion of all other cameras. He could not test exhibit number 133A in the same way because the negative was never recovered. Both pictures, however, have identical backgrounds and lighting, and judging from the shadows, were taken at the same angle. They are photographs of the same scene. Since exhibit number 133B was taken with Oswald's camera, it is reasonably certain that exhibit number 133A was taken by the same camera at the same time as Marina Oswald testified. Moreover, Schoenfeld testified that in his opinion, the photographs were not composites of 2 different photographs, and that Oswald's face had not been superimposed on another body. One of the photographs taken by Marina Oswald was widely published in newspapers and magazines, and in many instances, the details of these pictures differed from the original, and even from each other, particularly as to the configuration of the rifle. The Commission sought to determine whether these photographs were touched prior to publication. Schoenfeld testified that the published photographs appeared to be based on a copy of the original, which the publications had each retouched differently. Several of the publications furnished the Commission with the prints they had used, or described by correspondence the retouching they had done. This information enabled the Commission to conclude that the published pictures were the same as the original, except for retouching done by these publications, apparently for the purpose of clarifying the lines of the rifle and other details in the picture. The dates surrounding the taking of this picture and the purchase of the rifle reinforce the belief that the rifle in the photograph is the rifle which Oswald bought from Klein's. The rifle was shipped from Klein's in Chicago on March 20, 1963, at a time when the Oswalds were living on Neely Street. From an examination of one of the photographs, the Commission determined the dates of the issues of The Militant and The Worker which Oswald was holding in his hand. By checking the actual mailing dates of these issues, and the time it usually takes to effect delivery to Dallas, it was established that the photographs must have been taken sometime after March 27. Marina Oswald testified that the photographs were taken on a Sunday, about 2 weeks before the attempted shooting of Major General Edwin A. Walker on April 10, 1963. By Sunday, March 31, 1963, 10 days prior to the Walker attempt, Oswald had undoubtedly received the rifle shipped from Chicago on March 20. the revolver shipped from Los Angeles on the same date, and the two newspapers which he was holding in the picture. Rifle among Oswald's possessions. Marina Oswald testified that the rifle found on the 6th floor of the depository building was the, quote, fateful rifle of Lee Oswald, unquote. Moreover, it was the only rifle owned by her husband following his return from the Soviet Union in June 1962. It had been purchased in March 1963 and taken to New Orleans, where Marina Oswald saw it in their rented apartment during the summer of 1963. It appears from his wife's testimony that Oswald may have sat on the screened-in porch at night, practicing with the rifle by looking through the telescopic sight and operating the bolt. In September 1963, Oswald loaded their possessions into a station wagon owned by Ruth Payne, who had invited Marina Oswald and the baby to live at her home in Irving, Texas. Marina Oswald has stated that the rifle was among these possessions, although Ruth Payne testified that she was not aware of it. From September 24, 1963, when Marina Oswald arrived in Irving from New Orleans, until the morning of the assassination, the rifle was, according to the evidence, stored in a green and brown blanket in the Payne's garage among the Oswald's other possessions. About 1 week after the return from New Orleans, Marina Oswald was looking in the garage for parts to the baby's crib and thought that the parts might be in the blanket. When she started to open the blanket, she saw the stock of the rifle. Ruth and Michael Payne both noticed the rolled-up blanket in the garage during the time that Marina Oswald was living in their home. On several occasions, Michael Payne moved the blanket in the garage. He thought it contained tent poles or possibly other camping equipment, such as a folding shovel. When he appeared before the commission, Michael Payne lifted the blanket with the rifle wrapped inside and testified that it appeared to be the same approximate weight and shape as the package in his garage. About 3 hours after the assassination, a detective and deputy sheriff saw the blanket roll, tied with a string, lying on the floor of the Payne's garage. Each man testified that he thought he could detect the outline of a rifle in the blanket, even though the blanket was empty. Paul M. Stombaugh of the FBI laboratory examined the blanket and discovered a bulge approximately 10 inches long midway in the blanket. This bulge was apparently caused by a hard protruding object which had stretched the blanket's fibers. It could have been caused by the telescopic sight of the rifle, which was approximately 11 inches long. Conclusion. Having reviewed the evidence that 1. Lee Harvey Oswald purchased the rifle used in the assassination, 2. Oswald's palm print was on the rifle in a position which shows that he had handled it while it was disassembled, 3. Fibers found on the rifle most probably came from the shirt Oswald was wearing on the day of the assassination, 4. A photograph taken in the yard of Oswald's apartment showed him holding this rifle, and 5. The rifle was kept among Oswald's possessions from the time of its purchase until the day of the assassination. The commission concluded that the rifle used to assassinate President Kennedy and wound Governor Connally was owned and possessed by Lee Harvey Oswald. End of section 12. Recording by Linda Johnson. Section 13 of Report of the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy. The Warren Commission Report. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Report of the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy. The Warren Commission Report by the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy. Chapter 4, The Assassin, Part 2. The rifle in the building. The Commission has evaluated the evidence tending to show how Lee Harvey Oswald's Mannlicher Carcano rifle, serial number C2766, was brought into the depository building, where it was found on the 6th floor shortly after the assassination. In this connection, the Commission considered 1. The circumstances surrounding Oswald's return to Irving, Texas on Thursday, November 21, 1963. 2. The disappearance of the rifle from its normal place of storage. 3. Oswald's arrival at the depository building on November 22, carrying a long and bulky brown paper package. 4. The presence of a long, handmade brown paper bag near the point from which the shots were fired. And 5. The palm print, fiber, and paper analyses linking Oswald and the assassination weapon to this bag. The curtain rod story. During October and November of 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald lived in a rooming house in Dallas, while his wife and children lived in Irving, at the home of Ruth Payne, approximately 15 miles from Oswald's place of work at the Texas School Book Depository. Oswald traveled between Dallas and Irving on weekends in a car driven by a neighbor of the Paynes, Buell Wesley Frazier, who also worked at the depository. Oswald generally would go to Irving on Friday afternoon and return to Dallas Monday morning. According to the testimony of Frazier, Marina Oswald, and Ruth Payne, it appears that Oswald never returned to Irving in midweek prior to November 21, 1963, except on Monday, October 21, when he visited his wife in the hospital after the birth of their second child. During the morning of November 21, Oswald asked Frazier whether he could ride home with him that afternoon. Frazier, surprised, asked him why he was going to Irving on Thursday night rather than Friday. Oswald replied, quote, "I'm going home to get some curtain rods to put in an apartment," end quote. The two men left work at 4:40 p.m. and drove to Irving. There was little conversation between them on the way home. Mrs. Linnie Mae Randall, Frazier's sister, commented to her brother about Oswald's unusual midweek return to Irving. Frazier told her that Oswald had come home to get curtain rods. It would appear, however, that obtaining curtain rods was not the purpose of Oswald's trip to Irving on November 21. Mrs. A.C. Johnson, his landlady, testified that Oswald's room at 1026 North Beckley Avenue had curtains and curtain rods, and that Oswald had never discussed the subject with her. In the Paynes' garage, along with many other objects of a household character, there were 2 flat, lightweight curtain rods belonging to Ruth Payne, but they were still there on Friday afternoon after Oswald's arrest. Oswald never asked Mrs. Payne about the use of curtain rods, and Marina Oswald testified that Oswald did not say anything about curtain rods on the day before the assassination. No curtain rods were known to have been discovered in the depository building after the assassination. In deciding whether Oswald carried a rifle to work in a long paper bag on November 22, the Commission gave weight to the fact that Oswald gave a false reason for returning home on November 21, and one which provided an excuse for the carrying of a bulky package the following morning. The missing rifle. Before dinner on November 21, Oswald played on the lawn of the Paynes' home with his daughter June. After dinner, Ruth Payne and Marina Oswald were busy cleaning house and preparing their children for bed. Between the hours of 8 and 9 p.m., they were occupied with the children in the bedrooms located at the extreme east end of the house. On the west end of the house is the attached garage, which can be reached from the kitchen or from the outside. In the garage were the personal belongings of the Oswald family, including, as the evidence has shown, the rifle wrapped in the old brown and green blanket. At approximately 9 p.m., after the children had been put to bed, Mrs. Payne, according to her testimony before the Commission, quote, "went out to the garage to paint some children's blocks," and worked in the garage for half an hour or so. I noticed when I went out that the light was on." End quote. Mrs. Payne was certain that she had not left the light on in the garage after dinner. According to Mrs. Payne, Oswald had gone to bed by 9 p.m. Marina Oswald testified that it was between 9 and 10 p.m. Neither Marina Oswald nor Ruth Payne saw Oswald in the garage. The period between 8 and 9 p.m., however, provided ample opportunity for Oswald to prepare the rifle for his departure the next morning. Only if disassembled could the rifle fit into the paper bag found near the window from which the shots were fired. A firearms expert with the FBI assembled the rifle in 6 minutes using a 10-cent coin as a tool, and he could disassemble it more rapidly. While the rifle may have already been disassembled when Oswald arrived home on Thursday, he had ample time that evening to disassemble the rifle and insert it into the paper bag. On the day of the assassination, Marina Oswald was watching television when she learned of the shooting. A short time later, Mrs. Payne told her that someone had shot the president, quote, "from the building in which Lee is working," end quote. Marina Oswald testified that at the time, quote, "my heart dropped. I then went to the garage to see whether the rifle was there, and I saw that the blanket was still there, and I said, 'Thank God,'" end quote. She did not unroll the blanket. She saw that it was in its usual position, and it appeared to her to have something inside. Soon afterward, at about 3 p.m., police officers arrived and searched the house. Mrs. Payne pointed out that most of the Oswald's possessions were in the garage. With Ruth Payne acting as an interpreter, Detective Rose asked Marina whether her husband had a rifle. Mrs. Payne, who had no knowledge of the rifle, first said no, but when the question was translated, Marina Oswald replied yes. She pointed to the blanket which was on the floor very close to where Ruth Payne was standing. Mrs. Payne testified, quote, "As she, Marina, told me about it, I stepped onto the blanket roll, and she indicated to me that she had peered into this roll and saw a portion of what she took to be a gun she knew her husband to have, a rifle. And I then translated this to the officers, that she knew that her husband had a gun that he had stored in here. I then stepped off of it, and the officer picked it up in the middle, and it bent so." End quote. Mrs. Payne had the actual blanket before her as she testified, and she indicated that the blanket hung limp in the officer's hand. Marina Oswald testified that this was her first knowledge that the rifle was not in its accustomed place. The long and bulky package. On the morning of November 22, 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald left the Payne house in Irving at approximately 7:15 a.m., while Marina Oswald was still in bed. Neither she nor Mrs. Payne saw him leave the house. About half a block away from the Payne house was the residence of Mrs. Linnie Mae Randall, sister of the man with whom Oswald drove to work, Buell Wesley Frazier. Mrs. Randall stated that on the morning of November 22, while her brother was eating breakfast, she looked out the breakfast room window and saw Oswald cross the street and walk toward the driveway where her brother parked his car near the carport. He carried a, quote, "heavy brown bag," end quote. Oswald gripped the bag in his right hand near the top. Quote, "It tapered like this as he hugged it in his hand. It was more bulky toward the bottom," end quote, than toward the top. She then opened the kitchen door and saw Oswald open the right rear door of her brother's car and place the package in the back of the car. Mrs. Randall estimated that the package was approximately 28 inches long and about 8 inches wide. She thought that its color was similar to that of the bag found on the 6th floor of the schoolbook depository after the assassination. Frazier met Oswald at the kitchen door, and together they walked to the car. After entering the car, Frazier glanced over his shoulder and noticed a brown paper package on the back seat. He asked, quote, "What's the package, Lee?" end quote. Oswald replied, quote, curtain rods, end quote. Frazier told the commission, quote, the main reason he was going over there that Thursday afternoon when he was to bring back some curtain rods, so I didn't think any more about it when he told me that, end quote. Frazier estimated that the bag was 2 feet long, quote, give and take a few inches, end quote, and about 5 or 6 inches wide. As they sat in the car, Frazier asked Oswald where his lunch was, and Oswald replied that he was going to buy his lunch that day. Frazier testified that Oswald carried no lunch bag that day. Quote, when he rode with me, I say he always brought lunch, except that one day on November 22, he didn't bring his lunch that day, end quote. Frazier parked the car in the company parking lot about 2 blocks north of the depository building. Oswald left the car first, picked up the brown paper bag, and proceeded toward the building ahead of Frazier. Frazier walked behind, and as they crossed the railroad tracks, he watched the switching of the cars. Frazier recalled that one end of the package was under Oswald's armpit, and the lower part was held with his right hand, so that it was carried straight and parallel to his body. When Oswald entered the rear door of the depository building, he was about 50 feet ahead of Frazier. It was the first time that Oswald had not walked with Frazier from the parking lot to the building entrance. When Frazier entered the building, he did not see Oswald. One employee, Jack Doherty, believed that he saw Oswald coming to work, but he does not remember that Oswald had anything in his hands as he entered the door. No other employee has been found who saw Oswald enter that morning. In deciding whether Oswald carried the assassination weapon in the bag which Frazier and Mrs. Randall saw, the commission has carefully considered the testimony of these two witnesses with regard to the length of the bag. Frazier and Mrs. Randall testified that the bag which Oswald was carrying was approximately 27 or 28 inches long, whereas the wooden stock of the rifle, which is its largest component, measured 34.8 inches. The bag found on the 6th floor was 88 inches long. When Frazier appeared before the commission and was asked to demonstrate how Oswald carried the package, he said, quote, like I said, I remember that I didn't look at the package very much, but when I did look at it, he did have his hands on the package like that, end quote, and at this point, Frazier placed the upper part of the package under his armpit and attempted to cup his right hand beneath the bottom of the bag. The disassembled rifle was too long to be carried in this manner. Similarly, when the butt of the rifle was placed in Frazier's hand, it extended above his shoulder to ear level. Moreover, in an interview on December 1, 1963, with agents of the FBI, Frazier had marked the point on the back seat of his car, which he believed was where the bag reached when it was laid on the seat with one edge against the door. The distance between the point on the seat and the door was 27 inches. Mrs. Randall said, when shown the paper bag, that the bag she saw Oswald carrying, quote, wasn't that long. I mean, it was folded down at the top, as I told you. It definitely wasn't that long, end quote. And she folded the bag to length of about 28.5 inches. Frazier doubted whether the bag that Oswald carried was as wide as the bag found on the 6th floor, although Mrs. Randall testified that the width was approximately the same. The commission has weighed the visual recollection of Frazier and Mrs. Randall against the evidence here presented that the bag Oswald carried contained the assassination weapon, and has concluded that Frazier and Randall are mistaken as to the length of the bag. Mrs. Randall saw the bag fleetingly, and her first remembrance is that it was held in Oswald's right hand, quote, and it almost touched the ground as he carried it, end quote. Frazier's view of the bag was from the rear. He continually advised that he was not paying close attention. For example, he said, quote, I didn't pay too much attention the way he was walking because I was walking along there looking at the railroad cars and watching the men on the diesel switch them cars, and I didn't pay too much attention on how he carried the package at all, end quote. Fraser could easily have been mistaken when he stated that Oswald held the bottom of the bag cupped in his hand with the upper end tucked into his armpit. Location of bag. A handmade bag of wrapping paper and tape was found in the southeast corner of the 6th floor, alongside the window from which the shots were fired. It was not a standard type bag which could be obtained in a store, and it was presumably made for a particular purpose. It was the appropriate size to contain, in disassembled form, Oswald's Mannlicher Carcano rifle serial number C2766, which was also found on the 6th floor. 3 cartons had been placed at the window, apparently to act as a gun rest, and a 4th carton was placed behind those at the window. A person seated on the 4th carton could assemble the rifle without being seen from the rest of the 6th floor, because the cartons stacked around the southeast corner would shield him. The presence of the bag in this corner is cogent evidence that it was used as the container for the rifle. At the time the bag was found, Lieutenant Day of the Dallas Police wrote on it, quote, "Found next to the 6th floor window, gun fired from. May have been used to carry gun. Lieutenant J.C. Day." End quote. Scientific evidence linking rifle and Oswald to paper bag. Oswald's fingerprint and palm print found on bag. Using a standard chemical method involving silver nitrates, the FBI laboratory developed a latent palm print and latent fingerprint on the bag. Sebastian F. Latona, supervisor of the FBI's latent fingerprint section, identified these prints as the left index fingerprint and right palm print of Lee Harvey Oswald. The portion of the palm which was identified was the heel of the right palm, i.e. the area near the wrist, on the little finger side. These prints were examined independently by Ronald G. Witness of the FBI and by Arthur Mandela, a fingerprint expert with the New York City Police Department. Both concluded that the prints were the right palm and left index finger of Lee Oswald. No other identifiable prints were found on the bag. Oswald's palm print on the bottom of the paper bag indicated, of course, that he had handled the bag. Furthermore, it was consistent with the bag having contained a heavy or bulky object when he handled it, since a light object is usually held by the fingers. The palm print was found on the closed end of the bag. It was from Oswald's right hand, in which he carried the long package as he walked from Fraser's car to the building. Materials used to make bag. On the day of the assassination, the Dallas police obtained a sample of wrapping paper and tape from the shipping room of the depository and forwarded it to the FBI laboratory in Washington. James C. Cadigan, a questioned documents expert with the Bureau, compared the samples with the paper and tape in the actual bag. He testified, quote, "In all of the observations and physical tests that I made, I found the bag and the paper sample were the same." End quote. Among other tests, the paper and tape were submitted to fiber analysis and spectrographic examination. In addition, the tape was compared to determine whether the sample tape and the tape on the bag had been taken from the tape dispensing machine at the depository. When asked to explain the similarity of characteristics, Cadigan stated, quote, "Well, briefly, it would be the thickness of both the paper and the tape, the color under various lighting conditions of both the paper and the tape, the width of the tape, the knurled markings on the surface of the fiber, the texture of the fiber, the letting pattern. I found that the paper sack found on the 6th floor and the sample had the same observable characteristics both under the microscope and all the visual tests that I could conduct. The papers I also found were similar in fiber composition. Therefore, in addition to the visual characteristics, microscopic and UV ultraviolet characteristics." End quote. Mr. Cadigan concluded that the paper and tape from the bag were identical in all respects to the sample paper and tape taken from the Texas School Book Depository shipping room on November 22, 1963. On December 1, 1963, a replica bag was made from materials found on that date in the shipping room. This was done as an investigatory aid since the original bag had been discolored during various laboratory examinations and could not be used for valid identification by witnesses. Cadigan found that the paper used to make this replica sack had different characteristics from the paper in the original bag. The science of paper analysis enabled him to distinguish between different rolls of paper, even though they were produced by the same manufacturer. Since the depository normally used approximately one roll of paper every 3 working days, it was not surprising that the replica sack made on December 1, 1963, had different characteristics from both the actual bag and the sample taken on November 22. On the other hand, since 2 rolls could be made from the same batch of paper, one cannot estimate when, prior to November 22, Oswald made the paper bag. However, the complete identity of characteristics between the paper and tape in the bag found on the 6th floor and the paper and tape found in the shipping room of the depository on November 22 enabled the commission to conclude that the bag was made from these materials. The depository shipping department was on the 1st floor, to which Oswald had access in the normal performance of his duties, filling orders. Fibers in paper bag matched fibers in blanket. When Paul M. Stombaugh of the FBI laboratory examined the paper bag, he found on the inside a single brown, delustered viscose fiber and several light green cotton fibers. The blanket in which the rifle was stored was composed of brown and green cotton, viscose, and woolen fibers. The single brown viscose fiber found in the bag matched some of the brown viscose fibers from the blanket in all observable characteristics. The green cotton fibers found in the paper bag matched some of the green cotton fibers in the blanket, quote, in all observable microscopic characteristics, end quote. Despite these matches, however, Stombaugh was unable to render an opinion that the fibers which he found in the bag had probably come from the blanket, because other types of fibers present in the blanket were not found in the bag. He concluded, quote, all I would say here is that it is possible that these fibers could have come from this blanket, because this blanket is composed of brown and green woolen fibers, brown and green delustered viscose fibers, and brown and green cotton fibers. We found no brown cotton fibers, no green viscose fibers, and no woolen fibers. So if I found all of these, then I would have been able to say these fibers probably had come from this blanket. But since I found so few, then I would say the possibility exists these fibers could have come from this blanket, end quote. Stombaugh confirmed that the rifle could have picked up fibers from the blanket and transferred them to the paper bag. In light of the other evidence linking Lee Harvey Oswald, the blanket, and the rifle to the paper bag found on the 6th floor, the commission considered Stombaugh's testimony of probative deciding whether Oswald carried the rifle into the building in the paper bag. Conclusion. The preponderance of the evidence supports the conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald, 1, told the curtain rod story to Frazier to explain both the return to Irving on a Thursday and the obvious bulk of the package which he intended to bring to work the next day. 2, took paper and tape from the wrapping bench of the depository and fashioned a bag large enough to carry the disassembled rifle. 3, removed the rifle from the blanket in the Payne's garage on Thursday evening. 4, carried the rifle into the depository building, concealed in the bag. And 5, left the bag alongside the window from which the shots were fired. End of Section 13. Recording by Linda Johnson. Section 14 of Report of the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy The Warren Commission Report. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Report of the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy. The Warren Commission Report by the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy. Chapter 4, The Assassin, Part 3. Oswald at Window. Lee Harvey Oswald was hired on October 15, 1963, by the Texas School Book Depository as an order filler. He worked principally on the first and sixth floors of the building, gathering books listed on orders and delivering them to the shipping room on the first floor. He had ready access to the sixth floor from the southeast corner window of which the shots were fired. The commission evaluated the physical evidence found near the window after the assassination and the testimony of eyewitnesses in deciding whether Lee Harvey Oswald was present at this window at the time of the assassination. Palm prints and fingerprints on cartons and paper bag. Below the southeast corner window on the sixth floor was a large carton of books, measuring approximately 18 by 12 by 14 inches, which had been moved from a stack along the south wall. Atop this carton was a small carton marked Rolling Readers, measuring approximately 13 by 9 by 8 inches. In front of this small carton, and resting partially on the windowsill, was another small Rolling Readers carton. These two small cartons had been moved from a stack about 3 aisles away. The boxes in the window appeared to have been arranged as a convenient gun rest. Behind these boxes was another carton placed on the floor, on which a man sitting could look southwesterly down Elm Street over the top of the Rolling Readers cartons. Next to these cartons was the handmade paper bag previously discussed, on which appeared the print of the left index finger and right palm of Lee Harvey Oswald. The cartons were forwarded to the FBI in Washington. Sebastian F. Latona, supervisor of the latent fingerprint section, testified that 20 identifiable fingerprints and 8 palm prints were developed on these cartons. The carton on the windowsill and the large carton below the window contained no prints which could be identified as being those of Lee Harvey Oswald. The other Rolling Readers carton, however, contained a palm print and a fingerprint which were identified by Latona as being the left palm print and right index fingerprint of Lee Harvey Oswald. The commission has considered the possibility that the cartons might have been moved in connection with the work that was being performed on the sixth floor on November 22. Depository employees were laying a new floor at the west end and transferring books from the west to the east end of the building. The Rolling Readers cartons, however, had not been moved by the floor layers and had apparently been taken to the window from their regular position for some particular purpose. The Rolling Readers boxes contained, instead of books, light blocks used as reading aids. They could be easily adjusted and were still solid enough to serve as a gun rest. The box on the floor, behind the 3 near the window, had been one of these moved by the floor layers from the west wall to near the east side of the building in preparation for the laying of the floor. During the afternoon of November 22, Lieutenant Day of the Dallas Police dusted this carton with powder and developed a palm print on the top edge of the carton on the side nearest the window. The position of this palm print on the carton was parallel with the long axis of the box and at right angles with the short axis. The bottom of the palm rested on the box. Someone sitting on the box facing the window would have his palm in this position if he placed his hand alongside his right hip. This print, which had been cut out of the box, was also forwarded to the FBI, and Latona identified it as Oswald's right palm print. In Latona's opinion, quote, not too long, end quote, a time had elapsed between the time that the print was placed on the carton and the time that it had been developed by the Dallas police. Although Bureau experiments had shown that 24 hours was a likely maximum time, Latona stated that he could only testify with certainty that the print was less than 3 days old. The print, therefore, could have been placed on the carton at any time within this period. The freshness of this print could be estimated only because the Dallas police developed it through the use of powder. Since cartons absorb perspiration, powder can successfully develop a print on such material only within a limited time. When the FBI in Washington received the cartons, the remaining prints, including Oswald's on the rolling reader's carton, were developed by chemical processes. The freshness of prints developed in this manner cannot be estimated, so no conclusions can be drawn as to whether these remaining prints preceded or followed the print developed in Dallas by powder. Most of the prints were found to have been placed on the cartons by an FBI clerk and a Dallas police officer after the cartons had been processed with powder by the Dallas police. In his independent investigation, Arthur Mandela of the New York City Police Department reached the same conclusion as Latona, that the prints found on the cartons were those of Lee Harvey Oswald. In addition, Mandela was of the opinion that the print taken from the carton on the floor was probably made within a day or a day and a half of the examination on November 22. Moreover, another expert with the FBI, Ronald G. Whitmus, conducted a separate examination and also agreed with Latona that the prints were Oswald's. In evaluating the significance of these fingerprint and palm print identifications, the Commission considered the possibility that Oswald handled these cartons as part of his normal duties. Since other identifiable prints were developed on the cartons, the Commission requested that they be compared with the prints of the 12 warehouse employees who, like Oswald, might have handled the cartons. They were also compared with the prints of those law enforcement officials who might have handled the cartons. The results of this investigation are fully discussed in Chapter 6, page 249. Although a person could handle a carton and not leave identifiable prints, none of these employees, except Oswald, left identifiable prints on the cartons. This finding, in addition to the freshness of one of the prints and the presence of Oswald's prints on 2 of the 4 cartons and the paper bag, led the Commission to attach some probative value to the fingerprint and palm print identifications in reaching the conclusion that Oswald was at the window from which the shots were fired, although the prints do not establish the exact time he was there. Oswald's presence on 6th floor approximately 35 minutes before the assassination. Additional testimony linking Oswald with the point from which the shots were fired was provided by the testimony of Charles Givens, who was the last known employee to see Oswald inside the building prior to the assassination. During the morning of November 22, Givens was working with the floor-laying crew in the southwest section of the 6th floor. At about 11:45 a.m., the floor-laying crew used both elevators to come down from the 6th floor. The employees raced the elevators to the 1st floor. Givens saw Oswald standing at the gate on the 5th floor as the elevator went by. Givens testified that after reaching the 1st floor, quote, "I discovered I left my cigarettes in my jacket pocket upstairs, and I took the elevator back upstairs to get my jacket with my cigarettes in it," end quote. He saw Oswald, a clipboard in hand, walking from the southeast corner of the 6th floor toward the elevator. Givens said to Oswald, quote, "Boy, are you going downstairs? It's near lunchtime," end quote. Oswald said, quote, "No, sir. When you get downstairs, close the gate to the elevator," end quote. Oswald was referring to the west elevator, which operates by push button and only with the gate closed. Givens said, "Okay," and rode down in the east elevator. When he reached the 1st floor, the west elevator, the one with the gate, was not there. Givens thought this was about 11:55 a.m. None of the depository employees is known to have seen Oswald again until after the shooting. The significance of Givens' observation that Oswald was carrying his clipboard became apparent on December 2, 1963, when an employee, Frankie Kaiser, found a clipboard hidden by book cartons in the northwest corner of the 6th floor, at the west wall, a few feet from where the rifle had been found. This clipboard had been made by Kaiser and had his name on it. Kaiser identified it as the clipboard which Oswald had appropriated from him when Oswald came to work at the depository. 3 invoices on this clipboard, each dated November 22, were for Scott Forsman books located on the 1st and 6th floors. Oswald had not filled any of the 3 orders. Eyewitness identification of assassin. Howard L. Brennan was an eyewitness to the shooting. As indicated previously, the Commission considered his testimony as probative in reaching the conclusion that the shots came from the 6th floor, southeast corner window of the depository building. Brennan also testified that Lee Harvey Oswald, whom he viewed in a police lineup on the night of the assassination, was the man he saw fire the shots from the 6th floor window of the depository building. When the shots were fired, Brennan was in an excellent position to observe anyone in the window. He was sitting on a concrete wall on the southwest corner of Elm and Houston Streets, looking north at the depository building, which was directly in front of him. The window was approximately 120 feet away. In the 6 to 8 minute period before the motorcade arrived, Brennan saw a man leave and return to the window, quote, a couple of times, end quote. After hearing the first shot, which he thought was a motorcycle backfire, Brennan glanced up at the window. He testified that, quote, this man I saw previously was aiming for his last shot. As it appeared to me, he was standing up and resting against the left windowsill, end quote. Brennan saw the man fire the last shot and disappear from the window. Within minutes of the assassination, Brennan described the man to the police. This description most probably led to the radio alert sent to police cars at approximately 12:45 p.m., which described the suspect as white, slender, weighing about 165 pounds, about 5 foot 10 inches tall, and in his early 30s. In his sworn statement to the police later that day, Brennan described the man in similar terms, except that he gave the weight as between 165 and 175 pounds, and the height was omitted. In his testimony before the commission, Brennan described the person he saw as, quote, a man in his early 30s, fair complexion, slender, but neat slender, possible 5 foot 10, 160 to 170 pounds. Oswald was 5 foot 9 inches, slender, and 24 years old. When arrested, he gave his weight as 140 pounds. On other occasions, he gave weights of both 140 and 150 pounds. The New Orleans police records of his arrest in August of 1963 show a weight of 136 pounds. The autopsy report indicated an estimated weight of 150 pounds. Brennan's description should also be compared with the eyewitness description broadcast over the Dallas police radio at 1:22 p.m. of the man who shot Patrolman J.D. Tippett. The suspect was described as, quote, a white male about 30, 5 foot 8, black hair, slender, end quote. At 1:29 p.m., the police radio reported that the description of the suspect in the Tippett shooting was similar to the description which had been given by Brennan in connection with the assassination. Approximately 7 or 8 minutes later, the police radio reported that, quote, an eyeball witness, end quote, described the suspect in the Tippett shooting as, quote, a white male, 27, 5 foot 11, 165 pounds, black wavy hair, end quote. As will be discussed fully below, the commission has concluded that this suspect was Lee Harvey Oswald. Although Brennan testified that the man in the window was standing when he fired the shots, most probably he was either sitting or kneeling. The half-open window, the arrangement of the boxes, and the angle of the shots virtually preclude a standing position. It is understandable, however, for Brennan to have believed that the man with the rifle was standing. A photograph of the building, taken seconds after the assassination, shows 3 employees looking out of the 5th floor window directly below the window from which the shots were fired. Brennan testified that they were standing, which is their apparent position in the photograph. But the testimony of these employees, together with photographs subsequently taken of them at the scene of the assassination, establishes that they were either squatting or kneeling. Since the window ledges in the depository building are lower than in most buildings, a person squatting or kneeling exposes more of his body than would normally be the case. From the street, this creates the impression that the person is standing. Brennan could have seen enough of the body of a kneeling or squatting person to estimate his height. Shortly after the assassination, Brennan noticed 2 of these employees leaving the building and immediately identified them as having been in the 5th floor windows. When the 3 employees appeared before the commission, Brennan identified the 2 whom he saw leave the building. The 2 men, Harold Norman and James Jarman, Jr., each confirmed that when they came out of the building, they saw and heard Brennan describing what he had seen. Norman stated, quote, "I remember him talking, and I believe I remember seeing him saying that he saw us when we first went up to the 5th floor window. He saw us then." End quote. Jarman heard Brennan, quote, talking to this officer about that he had heard these shots and he had seen the barrel of the gun sticking out the window, and he said that the shots came from inside the building. End quote. During the evening of November 22, Brennan identified Oswald as the person in the lineup who bore the closest resemblance to the man in the window, but he said he was unable to make a positive identification. Prior to the lineup, Brennan had seen Oswald's picture on television, and he told the commission that whether this affected his identification, quote, "is something I do not know," end quote. In an interview with FBI agents on December 17, 1963, Brennan stated that he was sure that the person firing the rifle was Oswald. In another interview with FBI agents on January 7, 1964, Brennan appeared to revert to his earlier inability to make a positive identification, but in his testimony before the commission, Brennan stated that his remarks of January 7 were intended by him merely as an accurate report of what he said on November 22. Brennan told the commission that he could have made a positive identification in the lineup on November 22, but did not do so because he felt that the assassination was, quote, "a communist activity, and I felt like there hadn't been more than one eyewitness, and if it got to be a known fact that I was an eyewitness, my family or I, either one, might not be safe," end quote. When specifically asked before the commission whether or not he could positively identify the man he saw in the 6th floor window as the same man he saw in the police station, Brennan stated, quote, "I could at that time, I could with all sincerity identify him as being the same man," end quote. Although the record indicates that Brennan was an accurate observer, he declined to make a positive identification of Oswald when he first saw him in the police lineup. The commission, therefore, does not base its conclusion concerning the identity of the assassin on Brennan's subsequent certain identification of Lee Harvey Oswald as the man he saw fire the rifle. Immediately after the assassination, however, Brennan described to the police the man he saw in the window and then identified Oswald as the person who most nearly resembled the man he saw. The commission is satisfied that, at the least, Brennan saw a man in the window who closely resembled Lee Harvey Oswald, and that Brennan believes the man he saw was, in fact, Lee Harvey Oswald. 2 other witnesses were able to offer partial descriptions of a man they saw in the southeast corner window of the 6th floor approximately 1 minute before the assassination, although neither witness saw the shots being fired. Ronald Fisher and Robert Edwards were standing on the curb at the southwest corner of Elm and Houston Streets, the same corner where Brennan was sitting on a concrete wall. Fisher testified that about 10 or 15 seconds before the motorcade turned onto Houston Street from Main Street, Edwards said, quote, "Look at that guy there in that window," end quote. Fisher looked up and watched the man in the window for 10 or 15 seconds and then started watching the motorcade which came into view on Houston Street. He said that the man held his attention until the motorcade came because the man, quote, "appeared uncomfortable for one, and secondly, he wasn't watching. He didn't look like he was watching for the parade. He looked like he was looking down toward the Trinity River and the triple underpass down at the end, toward the end of Elm Street, and all the time I watched him, he never moved his head. He never moved anything, just was there, transfixed," end quote. Fisher placed the man in the easternmost window on the south side of the depository building on either the 5th or the 6th floor. He said that he could see the man from the middle of his chest to the top of his head, and that as he was facing the window, the man was in the lower right-hand portion of the window and, quote, "seemed to be sitting a little forward," end quote. The man was dressed in a light-colored open-neck shirt, which could have been either a sports shirt or a t-shirt, and he had brown hair, a slender face and neck with light complexion, and looked to be 22 or 24 years old. The person in the window was a white man and, quote, "looked to me like he was looking straight at the triple underpass," end quote, down Elm Street. Boxes and cases were stacked behind him. Approximately 1 week after the assassination, according to Fisher, policemen showed him a picture of Oswald. In his testimony, he said, quote, "I told them that that could have been the man, that could have been the man that I saw in the window in the schoolbook depository building, but that I was not sure," end quote. Fisher described the man's hair as some shade of brown, quote, "It wasn't dark and it wasn't light," end quote. On November 22, Fisher had apparently described the man as, quote, "lightheaded," end quote. Fisher explained that he did not mean by the earlier statement that the man was blonde, but rather that his hair was not black. Robert Edwards said that while looking at the south side of the depository building shortly before the motorcade, he saw nothing of importance, quote, "except maybe one individual who was up there in the corner room of the 6th floor, which was crowded in among boxes," end quote. He said that this was a white man about average in size, quote, "possibly thin," end quote, and that he thought the man had light brown hair. Fisher and Edwards did not see the man clearly enough or long enough to identify him. Their testimony is of probative value, however, because their limited description is consistent with that of the man who has been found by the Commission, based on other evidence, to have fired the shots from the window. Another person who saw the assassin as the shots were fired was Amos L. Ewens, age 15, who was one of the first witnesses to alert the police to the depository as the source of the shots, as has been discussed in Chapter 3. Ewens, who was on the southwest corner of Elm and Houston Streets, testified that he could not describe the man he saw in the window. According to Ewens, however, as the man lowered his head in order to aim the rifle down Elm Street, he appeared to have a white bald spot on his head. Shortly after the assassination, Ewens signed an affidavit describing the man as white, but a radio reporter testified that Ewens described the man to him as, quote, "colored," end quote. In his commission testimony, Ewens stated that he could not ascertain the man's race, and that the statement in the affidavit was intended to refer only to the white spot on the man's head and not to his race. A Secret Service agent who spoke to Ewens approximately 20 to 30 minutes after the assassination confirmed that Ewens could neither describe the man in the window nor indicate his race. Accordingly, Ewens' testimony is considered probative as to the source of the shots, but is inconclusive as to the identity of the man in the window. In evaluating the evidence that Oswald was at the southeast corner window of the 6th floor at the time of the shooting, the Commission has considered the allegation that Oswald was photographed standing in front of the building when the shots were fired. The picture, which gave rise to these allegations, was taken by Associated Press photographer James W. Altgens, who was standing on the south side of Elm Street, between the triple underpass and the depository building. As the motorcade started its descent down Elm Street, Altgens snapped a picture of the presidential limousine with the entrance to the depository building in the background. Just before snapping the picture, Altgens heard a noise which sounded like the popping of a firecracker. Investigation has established that Altgens' picture was taken approximately 2 seconds after the firing of the shot which entered the back of the president's neck. In the background of this picture were several employees watching the parade from the steps of the depository building. One of these employees was alleged to resemble Lee Harvey Oswald. The commission has determined that the employee was, in fact, Billy Lovelady, who identified himself in the picture. Standing alongside him were Buell Wesley Frazier and William Shelley, who also identified Lovelady. The commission is satisfied that Oswald does not appear in this photograph. End of section 14. Recording by Linda Johnson. Section 15 of Report of the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy, the Warren Commission Report. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Report of the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy, the Warren Commission Report, by the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy. Chapter 4, The Assassin, Part 4. Oswald's Actions in Building After Assassination. In considering whether Oswald was at the southeast corner window at the time the shots were fired, the Commission has reviewed the testimony of witnesses who saw Oswald in the building within minutes after the assassination. The Commission has found that Oswald's movements, as described by these witnesses, are consistent with his having been at the window at 12:30 p.m. The encounter in the lunchroom. The first person to see Oswald after the assassination was Patrolman M.L. Baker of the Dallas Police Department. Baker was riding a two-wheeled motorcycle behind the last press car of the motorcade. As he turned the corner from Maine onto Houston at a speed of about 5 to 10 miles per hour, a strong wind blowing from the north almost unseated him. At about this time, he heard the first shot. Having recently heard the sounds of rifles while on a hunting trip, Baker recognized the shots as that of a high-powered rifle. Quote, "It sounded high, and I immediately kind of looked up, and I had a feeling that it came from the building, either right in front of me, the depository building, or of the one across to the right of it." End quote. He saw pigeons flutter upward. He was not certain, quote, "but I am pretty sure they came from the building right on the northwest corner." End quote. He heard two more shots, spaced, quote, "pretty well even to me," end quote. After the third shot, he, quote, "revved that motorcycle up," end quote, drove to the northwest corner of Elm and Houston, and parked approximately 10 feet from the traffic signal. As he was parking, he noted that people were, quote, "falling, and they were rolling around down there, grabbing their children," end quote, and rushing about. A woman screamed, quote, "Oh, they have shot that man! They have shot that man!" End quote. Baker, quote, "had it in mind that the shots came from the top of this building here," end quote, so he ran straight to the entrance of the depository building. Baker testified that he entered the lobby of the building and, quote, "spoke out and asked where the stairs or elevator was, and this man, Mr. Truly, spoke up and says, 'It seems to me,' like he says, 'I am a building manager. Follow me, officer, and I will show you,' end quote. Baker and building superintendent Roy Truly went through a second set of doors and stopped at a swinging door where Baker bumped into Truly's back. They went through the swinging door and continued at, quote, "a good trot," end quote, to the northwest corner of the floor where Truly hoped to find one of the two freight elevators. Neither elevator was there. Truly pushed the button for the west elevator, which operates automatically if the gate is closed. He shouted twice, quote, "Turn loose the elevator," end quote. When the elevator failed to come, Baker said, quote, "Let's take the stairs," end quote. And he followed Truly up the stairway, which is to the west of the elevator. The stairway is located in the northwest corner of the depository building. The stairs from one floor to the next are L-shaped, with both legs of the L approximately the same length. Because the stairway itself is enclosed, neither Baker nor Truly could see anything on the second floor hallway until they reached the landing at the top of the stairs. On the second floor landing, there is a small open area with a door at the east end. This door leads into a small vestibule, and another door leads from the vestibule into the second floor lunchroom. The lunchroom door is usually open, but the first door is kept shut by a closing mechanism on the door. This vestibule door is solid, except for a small glass window in the upper part of the door. As Baker reached the second floor, he was about 20 feet from the vestibule door. He intended to continue around to his left toward the stairway going up, but through the window in the door, he caught a fleeting glimpse of a man walking in the vestibule toward the lunchroom. Since the vestibule door is only a few feet from the lunchroom door, the man must have entered the vestibule only a second or two before Baker arrived at the top of the stairwell. Yet, he must have entered the vestibule door before Truly reached the top of the stairwell, since Truly did not see him. If the man had passed from the vestibule into the lunchroom, Baker could not have seen him. Baker said, quote, "He, Truly, had already started around the bend to come to the next elevator going up. I was coming out this one on the second floor, and I don't know, I was kind of sweeping this area as I come up. I was looking from right to left, and as I got to this door here, I caught a glimpse of this man. Just, a sudden glimpse, and it looked to me like he was going away from me. I can't say whether he had gone on through that door, the lunchroom door, or not. All I did was catch a glance at him, and evidently this door might have been, closing and almost shut at that time," end quote. With his revolver drawn, Baker opened the vestibule door and ran into the vestibule. He saw a man walking away from him in the lunchroom. Baker stopped at the door of the lunchroom and commanded, quote, "Come here," end quote. The man turned and walked back toward Baker. He had been proceeding toward the rear of the lunchroom. Along a side wall of the lunchroom was a soft drink vending machine, but at that time the man had nothing in his hands. Meanwhile, Truly had run up several steps toward the third floor. Missing Baker, he came back to find the officer in the doorway to the lunchroom, facing Lee Harvey Oswald. Baker turned to Truly and said, quote, "Do you know this man? Does he work here?" end quote. Truly replied, "Yes." Baker stated later that the man did not seem to be out of breath. He seemed calm. Quote, "He never did say a word or nothing. In fact, he didn't change his expression one bit," end quote. Truly said of Oswald, quote, "He didn't seem to be excited or overly afraid or anything. He might have been a bit startled, like I might have been if somebody confronted me, but I cannot recall any change in expression of any kind on his face," end quote. Truly thought that the officer's gun at that time appeared to be almost touching the middle portion of Oswald's body. Truly also noted at this time that Oswald's hands were empty. In an effort to determine whether Oswald could have descended to the lunchroom from the 6th floor by the time Baker and Truly arrived, Commission counsel asked Baker and Truly to repeat their movements from the time of the shot until Baker came upon Oswald in the lunchroom. Baker placed himself on a motorcycle about 200 feet from the corner of Elm and Houston Streets, where he said he heard the shots. Truly stood in front of the building. At a given signal, they reenacted the event. Baker's movements were timed with a stopwatch. On the first test, the elapsed time between the simulated first shot and Baker's arrival on the second floor stair landing was 1 minute and 30 seconds. The second test run required 1 minute and 15 seconds. A test was also conducted to determine the time required to walk from the southeast corner of the 6th floor to the 2nd floor lunchroom by stairway. Special Agent John Howlett of the Secret Service carried a rifle from the southeast corner of the 6th floor along the east aisle to the northeast corner. He placed the rifle on the floor near the site where Oswald's rifle was actually found after the shooting. Then, Howlett walked down the stairway to the 2nd floor landing and entered the lunchroom. The first test, run at normal walking pace, required 1 minute 18 seconds. The second test, at a fast walk, took 1 minute 14 seconds. The second test followed immediately after the first. The only interval was the time necessary to ride in the elevator from the 2nd to the 6th floor and walk back to the southeast corner. Howlett was not short-winded at the end of either test run. The minimum time required by Baker to park his motorcycle and reach the 2nd floor lunchroom was within 3 seconds of the time needed to walk from the southeast corner of the 6th floor down the stairway to the lunchroom. The time actually required for Baker and Truly to reach the 2nd floor on November 22 was probably longer than in the test runs. For example, Baker required 15 seconds after the simulated shot to ride his motorcycle 180 to 200 feet, park it, and run 45 feet to the building. No allowance was made for the special conditions which existed on the day of the assassination: possible delayed reaction to the shot, jostling with the crowd of people on the steps, and scanning the area along Elm Street and the Parkway. Baker said, quote, "We simulated the shots, and by the time we got there, we did everything that I did that day, and this would be the minimum because I'm sure that it took me a little longer," end quote. On the basis of this time test, therefore, the commission concluded that Oswald could have fired the shots and still have been present in the 2nd floor lunchroom when seen by Baker and Truly. That Oswald descended by stairway from the 6th floor to the 2nd floor lunchroom is consistent with the movements of the two elevators, which would have provided the other possible means of descent. When Truly, accompanied by Baker, ran to the rear of the 1st floor, he was certain that both elevators, which occupy the same shaft, were on the 5th floor. Baker, not realizing that there were 2 elevators, thought that only one elevator was in the shaft and that it was 2 or 3 floors above the 2nd floor. In the few seconds which elapsed while Baker and Truly ran from the 1st to the 2nd floor, neither of these slow elevators could have descended from the 5th to the 2nd floor. Furthermore, no elevator was at the 2nd floor when they arrived there. Truly and Baker continued up the stairs after the encounter with Oswald in the lunchroom. There was no elevator on the 3rd or 4th floor. The east elevator was on the 5th floor when they arrived. The west elevator was not. They took the east elevator to the 7th floor and ran up a stairway to the roof, where they searched for several minutes. Jack Doherty, an employee working on the 5th floor, testified that he took the west elevator to the 1st floor after hearing a noise which sounded like a backfire. Eddie Piper, the janitor, told Doherty that the president had been shot, but in his testimony, Piper did not mention either seeing or talking with Doherty during these moments of excitement. Both Doherty and Piper were confused witnesses. They had no exact memory of the events of that afternoon. Truly was probably correct in stating that the west elevator was on the 5th floor when he looked up the elevator shaft from the 1st floor. The west elevator was not on the 5th floor when Baker and Truly reached that floor, probably because Jack Doherty took it to the 1st floor while Baker and Truly were running up the stairs or in the lunchroom with Oswald. Neither elevator could have been used by Oswald as a means of descent. Oswald's use of the stairway is consistent with the testimony of other employees in the building. 3 employees, James Jarman Jr., Harold Norman, and Bonnie Ray Williams, were watching the parade from the 5th floor, directly below the window from which the shots were fired. They rushed to the west windows after the shots were fired and remained there, until after they saw Patrolman Baker's white helmet on the 5th floor moving toward the elevator. While they were at the west windows, their view of the stairwell was completely blocked by shelves and boxes. This is the period during which Oswald would have descended the stairs. In all likelihood, Doherty took the elevator down from the 5th floor after Jarman, Norman, and Williams ran to the west windows and were deciding what to do. None of these three men saw Doherty, probably because of the anxiety of the moment and because of the books which may have blocked the view. Neither Jarman, Norman, Williams, or Doherty saw Oswald. Victoria Adams, who worked on the 4th floor of the depository building, claimed that within about 1 minute following the shots, she ran from a window on the south side of the 4th floor, down the rear stairs to the 1st floor, where she encountered two depository employees, William Shelley and Billy Lovelady. If her estimate of time is correct, she reached the bottom of the stairs before Truly and Baker started up, and she must have run down the stairs ahead of Oswald and would probably have seen or heard him. Actually, she noticed no one on the back stairs. If she descended from the 4th to the 1st floor as fast as she claimed in her testimony, she would have seen Baker or Truly on the 1st floor or on the stairs, unless they were already in the 2nd floor lunchroom talking to Oswald. When she reached the 1st floor, she actually saw Shelley and Lovelady slightly east of the east elevator. Shelley and Lovelady, however, have testified that they were watching the parade from the top step of the building entrance when Gloria Calverley, who works in the depository building, ran up and said that the president had been shot. Lovelady and Shelley moved out into the street. About this time, Shelley saw Truly and Patrolman Baker go into the building. Shelley and Lovelady, at a fast walk or trot, turned west into the railroad yards and then to the west side of the depository building. They re-entered the building by the rear door several minutes after Baker and Truly rushed through the front entrance. On entering, Lovelady saw a girl on the 1st floor who he believes was Victoria Adams. If Miss Adams accurately recalled meeting Shelley and Lovelady when she reached the bottom of the stairs, then her estimate of the time when she descended from the 4th floor is incorrect, and she actually came down the stairs several minutes after Oswald and after Truly and Baker as well. Oswald's departure from building. Within a minute after Baker and Truly left Oswald in the lunchroom, Mrs. R.A. Reed, clerical supervisor for the Texas School Book Depository, saw him walk through the clerical office on the 2nd floor toward the door leading to the front stairway. Mrs. Reed had watched the parade from the sidewalk in front of the building with Truly and Mr. O.V. Campbell, vice president of the depository. She testified that she heard 3 shots, which she thought came from the building. She ran inside and up the front stairs into the large open office reserved for clerical employees. As she approached her desk, she saw Oswald. He was walking into the office from the back hallway, carrying a full bottle of Coca-Cola in his hand, presumably purchased after the encounter with Baker and Truly. As Oswald passed Mrs. Reed, she said, quote, "Oh, the president has been shot, but maybe they didn't hit him," end quote. Oswald mumbled something and walked by. She paid no more attention to him. The only exit from the office, in the direction Oswald was moving, was through the door to the front stairway. Mrs. Reed testified that when she saw Oswald, he was wearing a t-shirt and no jacket. When he left home that morning, Marina Oswald, who was still in bed, suggested that he wear a jacket. A blue jacket, later identified by Marina Oswald as her husband's, was subsequently found in the building, apparently left behind by Oswald. Mrs. Reed believes that she returned to her desk from the street about 2 minutes after the shooting. Reconstructing her movements, Mrs. Reed ran the distance 3 times and was timed in 2 minutes by stopwatch. The reconstruction was the minimum time. Accordingly, she probably met Oswald at about 12:32, approximately 30 to 45 seconds after Oswald's lunchroom encounter with Baker and Truly. After leaving Mrs. Reed in the front office, Oswald could have gone down the stairs and out the front door by 12:33 p.m., 3 minutes after the shooting. At that time, the building had not yet been sealed off by the police. While it was difficult to determine exactly when the police sealed off the building, the earliest estimates would still have permitted Oswald to leave the building by 12:33. One of the police officers assigned to the corner of Elm and Houston Streets for the presidential motorcade, W.E. Barnett, testified that immediately after the shots, he went to the rear of the building to check the fire escape. He then returned to the corner of Elm and Houston, where he met a sergeant who instructed him to find out the name of the building. Barnett ran to the building, noted its name, and then returned to the corner. There he was met by a construction worker, in all likelihood Howard Brennan, who was wearing his work helmet. This worker told Barnett that the shots had been fired from a window in the depository building, whereupon Barnett posted himself at the front door to make certain that no one left the building. The sergeant did the same thing at the rear of the building. Barnett estimated that approximately 3 minutes elapsed between the time he heard the last of the shots and the time he started guarding the front door. According to Barnett, quote, there were people going in and out, end quote, during this period. Sergeant D.V. Harkness of the Dallas Police said that to his knowledge the building was not sealed off at 12:36 p.m. when he called in on police radio that a witness, Amos Ewens, had seen shots fired from a window of the building. At that time, Inspector Herbert V. Sawyer's car was parked in front of the building. Harkness did not know whether or not 2 officers with Sawyer were guarding the doors. At 12:34 p.m., Sawyer heard a call over the police radio that the shots had come from the depository building. He then entered the building and took the front passenger elevator as far as it would go, the 4th floor. After inspecting this floor, Sawyer returned to the street about 3 minutes after he entered the building. After he returned to the street, he directed Sergeant Harkness to station 2 patrolmen at the front door and not let anyone in or out. He also directed that the back door be sealed off. This was no earlier than 12:37 p.m. and may have been later. Special Agent Forrest V. Sorrells of the Secret Service, who had been in the motorcade, testified that after driving to Parkland Hospital, he returned to the depository building about 20 minutes after the shooting, found no police officers at the rear door, and was able to enter through this door without identifying himself. Although Oswald probably left the building at about 12:33 p.m., his absence was not noticed until at least 1/2 hour later. Truly, who had returned with Patrolman Baker from the roof, saw the police questioning the warehouse employees. Approximately 15 men worked in the warehouse, and Truly noticed that Oswald was not among those being questioned. Satisfying himself that Oswald was missing, Truly obtained Oswald's address, phone number, and description from his employment application card. The address listed was for the Payne home in Irving. Truly gave this information to Captain Fritz, who was on the 6th floor at the time. Truly estimated that he gave this information to Fritz about 15 or 20 minutes after the shots, but it was probably no earlier than 1:22 p.m., the time when the rifle was found. Fritz believed that he learned of Oswald's absence after the rifle was found. The fact that Truly found Fritz in the northwest corner of the floor, near the point where the rifle was found, supports Fritz's recollection. Conclusion. Fingerprint and palm print evidence establishes that Oswald handled 2 of the 4 cartons next to the window, and also handled a paper bag, which was found near the cartons. Oswald was seen in the vicinity of the southeast corner of the 6th floor approximately 35 minutes before the assassination, and no one could be found who saw Oswald anywhere else in the building until after the shooting. An eyewitness to the shooting immediately provided a description of the man in the window, which was similar to Oswald's actual appearance. This witness identified Oswald in a lineup as the man most nearly resembling the man he saw, and later identified Oswald as the man he observed. Oswald's known actions in the building immediately after the assassination are consistent with his having been at the southeast corner window of the 6th floor at 12:30 p.m. On the basis of these findings, the Commission has concluded that Oswald, at the time of the assassination, was present at the window from which the shots were fired. End of section 15. Recording by Linda Johnson.
I think we'll stop there because there's still 4 more parts. So do y'all have any questions, or you want to just call it and we'll meet probably around 9 o'clock tonight? I'll be on 9 o'clock tonight. I think I talked myself into corn dogs instead of chili. No, 9 p.m. I got, what do I get tonight? We'll see how my Progressive Party, Democrats of America meeting goes. But that one's starts at 8 and supposed to end at 9, but we'll see. I may get out of that early depending on how they are. So it's 9 p.m. Central. Mark this page. Okay, talk to y'all later. I'm just trying to save this site. I'll talk to y'all later on today. Thank you for sticking around and watching the video. Please like, share, follow, and remember you are loved no matter what you do. And visit my other social medias and follow me there. Thank you and goodbye.
We are the champions. No time.